Hey everyone, and welcome to today's lesson. Today we are going to look at cartoon analysis. I'm Mrs. Swart and I'm going to be working through this with you. So let's have a look at what you need to know to analyze a cartoon. Well, first of all, we obviously need to know what a cartoon is. And we need to know the features of cartoons, otherwise we cannot analyze them. We know that cartoons are pictures that are designed to make us laugh, it's to comment on current events or tell stories. They often comment on a political or social event in a humorous way. Now we all know that humor differs from person to person, but even if you don't appreciate the humor that is being used, you will find that you can still identify the humor and discuss it and explain it, because you will not be asked to discuss the humor or identify the humor in a cartoon if there is no humor. So remember that there will be ways to identify if something is funny or not. So let's look at it. What do we need? We need to account for the visual clues. That would be things like body language, facial expressions, and then we also have verbal or linguistic clues. That's things like the words. For example, they could be in bold, in capital letters, the punctuation used, and very often the humor. That is now what makes this cartoon funny. Very often it's where you have a contradiction or a difference between the visual clues and the verbal or linguistic clues, and that can create the humor. Other times, as in one of the examples I have, it's going to be about the clues that you get from prior knowledge. So let's have a look at some of the things we need to know. If you do not know what the features of a cartoon are, you will not be able to answer the questions because you won't be able to identify what we're speaking about. So we know that cartoons have frames, especially if it's a comic strip. There might be, and they're numbered, frame 1, 2, 3, or just frame 1 and 2. There are characters. We have body language, facial expressions, setting, speech or thought bubbles. We have punctuation that can influence the humor, and we're going to look at one example. Movement or action, language, font. There could be stereotypes or symbols in it. Now we've already looked at things like that in grade 8. So by grade 9 you are aware of what features you find in a cartoon. Something that you'll find very handy, this is used especially here by us, and that's the English Handbook and Study Guide, the yellow and red book that we use to assist with all of these things. So if you have one, and maybe you got one already in grade 8, it's a handy book to have to assist you. Let's see what they say about the cartoons. It's usually a humorous, drawn picture of a situation. They are used to express ideas or draw attention to a situation, which we've already mentioned. They can provide enjoyment, but they can also be serious and even, sort of like having a bite at someone, being sarcastic or nasty to someone. So we're going to see things like they have character, setting, all of these things. Political or topical. What does topical mean? Topical means that it's something that means something or matters now. And then it's very important to look at it in context. There could be dialogue used. Remember, with humor, we usually land up looking at a punchline, and we usually land up looking at the difference between what is being said and what is being done. But sometimes it can be that you see the humor only in the visual, only in the picture of what the characters are doing and their facial expressions and things like that. So you can go and look at things about what satire and parody is. We don't look at that too much at this stage. We're just trying to enable and empower ourselves to understand exactly how to cope with our cartoons and how to analyze these things. So we're trying to still keep it quite simple. When you study them, you look at the characters. They could be stereotypes. Remember that if you see a doctor, what do you expect? You expect a white coat and a stethoscope around the neck. Okay. Things like facial expressions and body language. You can't say to me, I can see the person's unhappy, or I can see it in his body language. You have to be able to describe what you see. You must be able to say in words what it is that this facial expression is telling you. You've all walked into a classroom, or you've seen a friend and you said, oh, what's wrong? Your friend hasn't said anything yet. You just looked at them and you have read their body language or their facial expression. And you know they're sad because their mouth is drawn down. There might be tears rolling down their cheeks. Their shoulders might be hunched over. Think about how you would look if you feel a certain way. Then your background and your setting, that tells you where something takes place. Sometimes you cannot see where it takes place. And then that means that the background or setting would probably not contribute at all to what you need to know. It's important that the cartoonist will show us exactly what is important and means something in the cartoon. So if the setting isn't really shown clearly or clarified in what you can see, then you know that it isn't important. Our language and our punctuation. Diction. What's diction? It comes from the word dictionary. Dictionary is words, so that you know what you have to say or what the character is saying. How do they speak when they're speaking to someone? You're going to look at the types of words used, and then punctuation. I think it's only in cartoons that we see people can use a lot of question marks or a whole lot of exclamation marks, and it's effective. In a cartoon, we don't want that in writing. And how does this punctuation affect the mood and tone? The actions, those are movement lines with facial expressions. We can have all sorts of different things to indicate there's movement. Someone's waving because there's little lines around their hands. Look at your objectives or the aim or the purpose of the cartoon. What are they trying to do? They might be trying to inform or entertain or even educate someone, or maybe the whole thing is just they want to bring a message across, maybe an issue that needs to be highlighted. Then remember that when you respond to any cartoon, you have to make sure that you say exactly what you mean. The marker isn't there to try and figure out what you're saying about this, or you have to, if you say something about it, the character is sad. How do you know he's sad? Then you explain what you see. You must pretend that the marker is really a silly, stupid person who knows nothing about what's going on in this picture. They mustn't read between the lines to figure out what you are trying to say. So the marker mustn't guess what you're trying to say. Your teacher might say, oh, I understand what he means. That's not what the marker's there for, not to understand what you mean. It must be clear that you know what you want to say and that you mean what you want to say. Okay, so let's look at an example here. Here we have 4 frames. This is from Madam and Eve, and we want to look maybe at humor, or we want you to compare how a character feels from one frame to another. Now, if you're asked to compare, for instance, how does Gwen, or the grandmother, sorry, in this case, how does she feel in frame 3 and then in frame 4? Now, if you ask something like that, you are obviously looking at her expression and if she says anything. Yeah, she doesn't say anything, but you can see from looking satisfied, she looks absolutely horrified in the next one with the hand over the eyes. Then you would say something like, if you have to answer, you would say frame 3, put a colon and say, in frame 3, the grandmother, or you could just say the grandmother is happy. How do you know she's happy or satisfied? She has a very broad smile on her face, and you can see that, she's happy. In the frame 4, she's frustrated or unhappy because she has her hand over her eyes, and you can see her mouth is drawn into almost like a pouting place. If you want to look at the humor, we'll look at humor just now in another one, but then you're going to say how maybe the visual or the verbal clues combine or assist with the humor. Now be very careful of this, that you make it clear that you know the difference between the two, that when you write about verbal clues, you can mention them and explain them. We know the characters, they can be animal or inanimate, it can be humans. The setting, we've already said where it takes place will tell us. We'll see from the pictures where it takes place. Now, punctuation is so important because what makes this funny is the incorrect punctuation. Let's eat grandma instead of let's eat grandma. So the first one, you're telling everyone that you must eat your grandma, and the second one you're saying let's eat, and then you say to your grandmother so that she knows you're all going to sit down to a meal and grandma isn't on the menu. Okay, now this is an example of some of the lines and some of the action pictures. I love this one because it shows you everything. At the top, just behind his head, you have it's like water droplets, because that's showing he's really running and he's sweating and sweat's flying off of his head. Then you have the lines to show he's running. You can see the arms and the legs and the whole body's working together, and the little clouds of dust as well. So you see how much there is to show that he's running, and he's obviously enjoying it because he is smiling from ear to ear. Stereotypes and symbols are always going to be there because we associate certain things, especially in cartoons. If you think of a teacher, you imagine what a teacher would like. You'll probably expect glasses, hair in a bun, something like that. Here we have some examples of the stereotypes that you expect. When you see a chef, you expect a chef's hat on and maybe a spoon or something in the hand. Doctor, there you have it with his stethoscope and his white jacket. So please remember that. Then let's quickly look at this one now. Yeah, the humor is in the topic. The teacher says today's pop quiz is on collective nouns. Ready, go. And these learners are completing all these collective nouns. And then the humor in it is, you see that Tandi's sitting thinking in frame 3, she's thinking about a what of thieves. And in frame 4, she writes, a government of thieves. Now, some of you would say that is funny in itself, but you know what makes it really funny here is the fact that if you go and check what they say and what the correct collective noun is for thieves, it's a government of thieves. And that is what makes it funny, is the fact that you expect a government to be ruling, to be ethically and morally upright, and yeah, you see, oh my word, that's what makes it funny, is it's a government of thieves. When you look at humor, you look at things like the punchline or verbal clues. You could have the visual clues and the verbal clues that seem to oppose one another or even support each other. Look at what you ask and make sure that you are clear on that. And there could also just be the visual clues. So look very carefully at where you get where the humor comes in. In this case, the punchline is right at the end. And then last but not least, please make sure that you practice, because if you're a good athlete, you'll have to practice to remain the best. And if you're just going to be average, you will never get ahead. Make sure you practice, because that is the way you will manage to perfect what you're doing. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for today's lesson.